You believe that this sadness that insists on inhabiting your days is simply the result of bad luck, or a bad period. But what if it isn't? What if it's actually a silent messenger, carrying a code about the way you live? Imagine that your mind, instead of simply getting sick, is trying to alert you to something your conscious eye refuses to see. Most people shy away from this hypothesis because it requires courage. Courage to admit that it's not just about waiting for the storm to pass, but about deciphering why it arrived. Jordan Peterson would say that suffering is not a flaw in the system, but an essential fact of existence. And chronic sadness, when not explained by obvious clinical causes, can be a sign that the structure of your life is unstable. It appears not only to punish, but to warn. The problem is that we have been trained to silence discomfort, whether with distractions, quick pleasures, or emotional numbing. However, in doing so, we become blind to what this pain was trying to show. It's not an external enemy you can simply avoid. Sadness that won't go away is like a persistent shadow, and the more you try to ignore it, the more it clings to you. It's a warning that something in your personal narrative is out of alignment. Perhaps you've betrayed your own values. Perhaps you've allowed chaos to overwhelm you. Perhaps you've abdicated responsibilities that sustain the meaning of life. Whatever the case, it's trying to expose the crack in your foundation. And that's why starting this conversation requires honesty. This sadness won't go away just because you want it to. It's the echo of something deep, and until you reach that invisible source, it will remain. The difference is that, with the right approach, you can transform that very pain into strength. And that starts by accepting the most uncomfortable hypothesis. The problem isn't just the world around you. It could be the way you're interacting with it. Peterson often confronts this reality without softening its impact. He doesn't say, everything will be okay, because it isn't always. What he's saying is that life is inevitably difficult, and if you don't prepare to deal with that difficulty, it will crush you. This perspective isn't a punishment, it's a call to action. A call to see that persistent sadness can be a sign that you're living below the limits of your own moral strength. The question is, will you continue to treat this pain as a problem to be eliminated? Or will you see it as a teacher demanding attention? Because harsh teachers don't disappear. They wait until you learn the lesson. Perhaps this sadness is the teacher your life sent to pull you out of inertia. And if that's true, then running away from it is running away from your own evolution. There's no promise of quick relief here. The path we'll follow isn't one of immediate comfort, but of conscious rebuilding. And rebuilding hurts. But the pain that comes from rebuilding is very different from the pain that comes from stagnation. One slowly erodes, the other forges what you need to become. If you're willing to listen, this will be the first step toward transforming the shadow that haunts you into the flame that will light your path. Not because someone else will do it for you, but because you will learn to do it, and sadness, paradoxically, will be an essential part of that victory. There's a stark difference between having compassion for yourself and victimizing yourself. The deep sadness that persists isn't just a passing discomfort. It's a force that presses against your chest, altering how you see the world, changing the flavor of life. It's not about being down or having a bad day. It's a constant, almost physical presence that accompanies every thought. And this needs to be recognized not as a weakness, but as a battlefield you're already on, whether you choose to be or not. Jordan Peterson discusses chaos as this inevitable entity we all face. In mythology, chaos is the wild territory outside the city walls, a place unpredictable, dangerous, and yet brimming with possibilities. When sadness sets in, it's as if the walls of your inner city have fallen and chaos has invaded. In this scenario, you're not just a patient awaiting healing. You're a warrior isolated in enemy territory. The first validation that needs to happen is simple but powerful. You're not overreacting. The weight you feel is real, the exhaustion you experience is legitimate, and the struggle you're fighting isn't any lesser because it doesn't show in photos or in the eyes of others. The hardest battle is the one no one sees. When you get up in the morning and, even without energy, fulfill your obligations, that's already an act of resistance. When you face the feeling of worthlessness and still persist, you're already acting like a fighter. This perspective changes everything. It's not pity you should offer yourself, but respect. Respect for the fact that you're enduring a war without flags, without fanfare, without an audience. And paradoxically, it's precisely this invisible struggle that demands the greatest strength. A soldier in the open field knows where the enemy is. You face an enemy that infiltrates every corner of your mind. Peterson insists that suffering must be treated with the gravity it deserves. When we underestimate it, we give it room to spread like poison. Validating pain isn't about drowning in it, but about recognizing that it is an inevitable part of the terrain on which life unfolds. Failing to recognize the seriousness of the struggle is like walking unarmed into a minefield. What this means in practice is that you need to approach this sadness differently. It's not an accident, it's not a programming glitch. It's a sign that you're in touch with deeper aspects of reality, those most people try to avoid at all costs. You've seen the chaos, you've felt its weight, you've borne its burden. This in itself places you in a different category of person, someone who knows darkness and therefore has the chance to truly know it. But this validation requires something more, a conscious choice to treat yourself as someone worthy of fighting, not with superficial flattery, but with discipline and preparation. Because a warrior who respects the enemy also respects himself enough to arm himself and train. Sadness may have invaded your territory, but that doesn't mean it has won. Recognizing the gravity of your pain is the initial act of resistance. It's the moment you raise your flag and say, "I see you, and I'm willing to face whatever it takes." This doesn't dissolve the chaos, but it changes your stance toward it. And this stance is what will determine whether you will be crushed or forged by this battle. When pain lingers and chaos sets in, the first sensation is that of being lost. It's like walking through a dense forest with no trails or landmarks, where each step seems only to increase the confusion. It's in this scenario that the figure of a guide makes a difference, not a savior promising to carry you on their shoulders, but someone who knows the terrain and offers a map. This is how Jordan Peterson appears in this narrative. Peterson doesn't speak as a generic counselor or a positivity enthusiast. He speaks as a cartographer of the human condition, someone who has studied the boundaries between order and chaos and charted possible routes through them. His work combines psychology, philosophy, mythology, and clinical experience to create something more than life tips. He builds navigation systems for those adrift. The presence of a legitimate authority in moments of profound suffering is essential. Without it, the mind tends to wander in circles, repeating the same mistakes and reinforcing the same destructive patterns. A guide doesn't remove obstacles, but rather shows which paths are viable and which lead to the abyss. Peterson does this by reinterpreting pain not as a defect but as a coded message that needs to be decoded with responsibility and action. His approach is relentlessly rational. He doesn't deny the gravity of suffering, but he insists on placing it within a context that allows action. It's the difference between looking at a blank map and one with precise coordinates. Even if the journey is difficult, knowing where you are and where you can go transforms the way you face the battle. Peterson also confronts a dangerous illusion, the idea that the meaning of life lies in avoiding pain. According to him, life already carries inevitable suffering, and true meaning comes when one chooses to bear it voluntarily and productively. In this sense, persistent sadness ceases to be an absolute obstacle and becomes a weight that can strengthen those who lift it daily. In presenting his philosophy, he challenges the viewer to see themselves as protagonists, not victims. This isn't an invitation to deny hardship, but to embrace the role of builder of one's own life structure. And this is precisely where his authority becomes necessary. Because without a map, chaos engulfs. But with a guide, chaos can be reorganized into something that sustains growth. This authority isn't imposed by force, but by example and intellectual rigor. He cites stories, data, studies, and symbols to reinforce that this isn't a matter of personal opinion, but of universal standards. He doesn't offer shortcuts, but shows that there is a path, and that you can follow it if you're willing to take responsibility for your own destiny. If this conversation has provided clarity or provoked reflection so far, then you have already received something of value. Give back now, subscribe to the channel, and leave a like. This isn't just a way to support this work. It's a symbolic gesture of commitment to your own journey. Reciprocity is part of this construction. You receive, but you also position yourself as someone who contributes to keeping this exchange alive. Peterson's authority isn't comfortable because it demands more than listening. It demands action. He doesn't promise a world without pain, but he offers tools so that pain isn't in vain. And by following a guide who's already walked similar paths, you reduce the chance of getting lost and increase the possibility of transforming this invisible sadness into visible strength. Having a map is essential, but it's not enough. A guide may show you the way, but it's the tools that allow you to navigate uneven terrain, overcome obstacles, and build structures amidst the chaos. Jordan Peterson doesn't offer ready-made solutions, but rather a set of principles and practices that serve as tools for the battle against persistent sadness. The first of these tools is order. In an internal and external world dominated by chaos, order is the foundation that sustains progress. Peterson is adamant on this point. Tidy your room, take care of your space, establish a minimal routine. Not because these tasks are magical or solve everything immediately, but because they create a core of stability that can expand. An organized physical environment acts as a psychological anchor. It's a constant reminder that, despite the chaos, you can still exert control over a part of your reality. The second tool is clarity of values. Prolonged sadness is often fueled by a disconnect between what you say you value and what you actually experience. Peterson emphasizes the importance of defining core principles and aligning your actions with them. This consistency creates direction and reduces the feeling of being lost. Without it, every decision seems arbitrary and purposeless, and the mind sinks even deeper. The third tool is voluntary responsibility. It's not just bearing the weight of life, but consciously choosing it. This means seeking out challenges that strengthen you, rather than waiting for circumstances to become ideal. The act of choosing to carry a worthwhile burden radically changes your relationship with your own pain. Instead of feeling dragged down by life, you find yourself walking through it with intention. Another central tool is the use of narrative as a weapon. Peterson constantly draws on mythology, literature, and history to show that human suffering is a timeless pattern, and that confronting it is the path to transformation. By reinterpreting your own life as a story in which you are the hero facing the dragon, sadness ceases to be an amorphous weight and becomes the clear adversary that must be defeated. But these tools aren't easy to wield. They require daily effort, discipline, and the courage to confront oneself. That's why Peterson rejects the helpless victim mentality. He treats the viewer as someone capable and intelligent, someone who can handle life's complexity as long as they're willing to pay the price. This firm tone is part of the tool itself. It takes the viewer out of their comfort zone and into the realm of action. Implementing these tools is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. Order is lost if not maintained. Values weaken if not revised, and accountability dissolves if not reaffirmed. It's constant work, but it's precisely this constancy that builds the inner strength capable of withstanding the sadness that doesn't dissolve on its own. Peterson makes it clear that the goal isn't to completely eliminate pain. That's impossible. The goal is to transform it into fuel. With the right tools, sadness becomes a trigger for structural change, not just a paralyzing force. It's the difference between carrying a burden that crushes you and carrying a burden that strengthens you. When these tools are applied together, the effect is cumulative. Small daily victories build confidence. Clarity of values keeps us on track. Voluntary accountability amplifies strength, and the heroic narrative provides the meaning needed to sustain the effort. This combination is the arsenal that allows us to face invisible sadness not as a resigned victim, but as a fighter determined to win. Up until this point, the narrative has focused on understanding the pain, respecting it, and acknowledging the gravity of the chaos. But understanding isn't enough. There's a crucial moment in any journey of transformation, the moment when the search for simple relief gives way to the search for responsibility. This is the point at which the weight you once crushed becomes the weight you shape, the natural impulse when faced with persistent sadness is to look for ways to quickly get rid of it. Emotional painkillers, incessant distractions, superficial changes, anything that reduces the discomfort. The problem is that when the goal is simply to avoid pain, growth is sacrificed. Jordan Peterson argues that this is precisely when we need to reverse the logic. Stop asking, "How can I get rid of this?" and start asking, "What is this pain trying to make me?" This inversion completely changes your internal posture. Instead of acting like someone cornered, you begin to act like someone who chooses to fight. And this choice isn't just symbolic. It transforms the way your brain interprets its own existence. By voluntarily deciding to carry the weight, you stop being pushed by circumstances and start directing them. The turning point is marked by the acceptance that chaos will not disappear. It will always lurk, but by taking responsibility, you build enough order to face it without being swallowed up. This responsibility is not a prison sentence. It is a key. It is what opens the possibility of living a meaningful life even amidst pain. In practical terms, this means exchanging victim-centered thinking for deliberate action. If your body and mind are weakened, look for concrete ways to strengthen them, even if they're small but consistent steps. If your relationships are deteriorating, take action to repair them or establish clear boundaries. If your work lacks meaning, create value in it, or seek challenges that break you out of stagnation. In all these cases, the turning point is to abandon the expectation that something external will solve the problem and accept that change begins with what you control. The transition is uncomfortable. The weight feels heavier when you take it on voluntarily because there are no more excuses. But it's precisely in this discomfort that a new identity is forged. It's here that you stop seeing yourself as someone who suffers passively and start seeing yourself as someone who actively fights. And this shift in identity is perhaps the greatest gain you can have in this process. Peterson reinforces that the meaning of life is not in avoiding suffering, but in facing it in a way that produces something of value. This implies full responsibility for one's own actions, choices, and even the way one interprets one's own story. There is no longer room for outsourcing control of the narrative. The turning point is, therefore, a call to assume the role of protagonist and abandon the role of spectator. This is the moment when sadness stops being just an invisible enemy and becomes a harsh master. A master that demands discipline, resilience, and vision. And by accepting this discipline, you begin to realize that each small victory against internal chaos is a building block in the construction of a worthwhile life. The turning point isn't a dramatic one-time event. It's a decision that needs to be reaffirmed every day. It's looking at the weight and choosing to lift it again, knowing that it's strengthening not just your muscles but your very soul. And once that choice is made, the game changes. The chaos still exists, but you're no longer the same person who entered it. One of the most common mistakes when dealing with persistent sadness is believing that willpower alone will be enough to overcome the chaos. While determination is essential, the human mind responds more effectively when guided by well-structured systems and triggers. Jordan Peterson understands this and uses universal psychological principles to keep people engaged in the process of change. The first of these triggers is curiosity. The mind naturally seeks to fill gaps in information. When Peterson presents concepts like maps of meaning or rules for life, he awakens in the viewer the need to understand how these ideas connect to their suffering. Curiosity in this context is not just an intellectual interest. It is a drive to explore internal territories we normally avoid. Sensing that there is something valuable hidden behind one's own pain, the individual remains active in the search for answers. The second trigger is anticipation. Creating a vision of a possible outcome, even if distant, makes the viewer realize there's something to gain at the end of the effort. Peterson uses this technique when describing the potential of the ideal self that can emerge when responsibility is assumed. By planting the seed of this image, he establishes a reference point that serves as emotional fuel to endure immediate difficulties. The third trigger is a sense of order. Amidst chaos, the mind craves clear patterns. Therefore, Peterson organizes his ideas into rules, lists, or numbered principles. This structure gives the viewer the sense that they are following a tangible plan, not just navigating abstractions. When life feels formless, finding a reliable set of guidelines is like receiving a survival manual. Another strategic element is implicit social proof. By citing stories, myths, and clinical cases, Peterson shows that these internal battles are not exclusive to those watching. This reduces psychological isolation and reinforces the perception that the struggle is universal, validating the effort to continue. The feeling of being part of a larger narrative strengthens commitment to the journey. But perhaps most powerful is the trigger of reciprocity. When someone receives genuine value, there's a natural tendency to reciprocate. This reciprocity isn't just a superficial exchange, it's a silent pact of recognition. If this reflection has brought you clarity, strength, or direction, give back now, subscribe to the channel, and like it. This isn't just a favor. It's a concrete act that reinforces your commitment to transformation. By taking action, you send a message to yourself that you are investing in this process, not just passively consuming. These triggers don't work in isolation. They intertwine, creating a cycle of continuous engagement. Curiosity leads to the pursuit of more knowledge. Anticipation maintains motivation over time. Order provides direction and security. Social proof reduces the burden of loneliness. And reciprocity transforms content reception into active participation. The result is a mind more willing to sustain the effort required to navigate chaos. This doesn't mean the path becomes easier, just that internal resistance diminishes. And when resistance diminishes, energy can be redirected toward concrete action. Peterson doesn't manipulate these triggers. He uses them transparently and intentionally. They don't serve to convince someone to believe something false, but to create the psychological conditions that make it possible to apply the truth in practical ways. It's an ethical use of psychology, aimed at empowerment, not exploitation. In an internal battlefield where fatigue and doubt are constant, having these triggers as allies is like having strategic provisions for the journey. They don't fight for you, but they ensure you remain capable of fighting until the end. In the war against internal chaos, the mind needs anchors. When mental confusion is intense and emotions are out of control, short, precise phrases can serve as anchors to reorient thought. Jordan Peterson uses this strategy deliberately, repeating essential principles until they become almost automatic, like battle mantras that resonate even in the darkest moments. One of the most well-known is the statement that life is suffering. At first glance, this phrase may seem pessimistic, but its constant repetition has the opposite effect. It removes surprise in the face of difficulties. When suffering is seen as inevitable, it ceases to seem a personal injustice and becomes part of the fabric of existence. This understanding reduces unproductive indignation and frees up energy to deal with reality. Another frequently repeated pillar is, responsibility is the path to meaning. Here, the repetition serves as a reminder that running away from the weight of life only exacerbates the emptiness. Each time this phrase is evoked, it reaffirms the direct connection between assuming duties and finding purpose. It's a short sentence, but when internalized, it can completely change one's attitude toward adversity. Peterson also reinforces the idea that chaos is inevitable, but order is constructed. This phrase, repeated and contextualized in various ways, creates a worldview in which the individual understands that there is no perfect state of guaranteed stability. Order is not found ready-made. It must be created and maintained daily. This fosters an active and constructive mindset, rather than a passive expectation of external improvements. The value of these repetitions lies not only in their content, but in the rhythm with which they reappear. In moments of doubt, these phrases act as a clear internal command. They simplify life's complexity into principles of immediate action. This is why repetition is not a marketing tool, but a mental training tool. Just as a soldier repeats orders until he reacts instinctively on the battlefield, the repetition of philosophical mantras prepares the mind to react correctly in the midst of a crisis. Creating a common language also strengthens the connection between the teacher and the learner. By adopting these mantras, the viewer begins to think and express themselves within the same conceptual framework Peterson proposes. This reduces the dispersion of ideas and increases mental clarity, as each sentence encapsulates an entire network of concepts and experiences. Another powerful effect is that these phrases, when used daily, function as psychological micro-interventions. When sadness tries to take over, reminding yourself that responsibility is the path to meaning can be enough to prevent an act of escape or procrastination. When chaos seems unbearable, repeating that order is constructed can spur small actions that restore stability. This process of internalization doesn't happen all at once. It's the result of constant exposure, reflection, and practical application. The more an individual repeats and uses these phrases, the more they cease to be just external words and become internal statements of identity. It's no longer Jordan Peterson said, but this is how I think and act. Strategic repetitions aren't empty tricks. They're tools for shaping thinking. They simplify the path when the mind is overwhelmed, reminding us that no matter how complex the scenario, there's always a clear direction to follow. And when that direction becomes part of our own inner voice, the fight against sadness stops being a chaotic battle and becomes an organized march toward a goal. Persistent sadness is often accompanied by a suffocating sense of stagnation. The present seems immutable, and the future non-existent. But the role of a clear and powerful vision is precisely to break through this blockage, offering a picture of who you can become if you decide to face the chaos. Jordan Peterson describes this future not as a pain-free paradise, but as a state in which you become stronger, more competent, and more worthy of respect, including self-respect. This vision isn't a romantic dream. It's concrete, built on actions and responsibilities assumed in the present. Imagine waking up and realizing that, although the weight is still there, your capacity to carry it is much greater. Imagine entering environments that previously made you feel insecure, and instead of feeling diminished, feeling empowered to act and make decisions. This transformation isn't magical, but the result of daily choices and the discipline to stay on track. The ideal self, Peterson proposes, is neither perfect nor invulnerable. It's marked by scars, having been through real battles. It's someone who knows what it means to feel pain, but who doesn't let it define them. Instead, they use this experience as fuel to act with greater clarity, courage, and compassion. This person isn't someone who constantly runs away from problems, but someone who has become capable of solving them, or at least facing them head-on. Projecting this desirable future requires specificity. It's not enough to say, I want to improve. You need to visualize exactly what this improvement means. Stronger relationships, a healthier body, more meaningful work, a purpose that guides decisions. The more detailed the image, the more it becomes a beacon in the storms. The most powerful aspect of this vision is that it redefines our relationship with suffering. Instead of being a weight that drags us down, it becomes training that strengthens us. Each difficult day becomes a stepping stone in building this new version of ourselves. Pain ceases to be merely a reminder of weakness and becomes proof of the path we're taking. Peterson emphasizes that this transformation isn't about comparing yourself to others, but about comparing yourself to yourself, not to who you are now, but to who you can be. This kind of comparison is constructive because it maintains internal focus and avoids the trap of measuring progress by others' standards. It's a silent competition against one's own inertia. This vision also serves as a source of motivation on days when nothing seems worthwhile. When the present is gray, remembering that there's a stronger version of you waiting to be built can be enough to take the next step. It's a reminder that every responsible choice, every act of discipline, every confrontation with chaos is a stone laid in that foundation. Ultimately, projecting a desirable future isn't just a mental exercise, it's a commitment. By defining it, you force yourself to align your actions with it. It's not just about dreaming, but about acting as if you were already that person, making the decisions they would make, carrying the burdens they would carry, facing the fears they would face. It's about living so that when the future arrives, it finds you ready to inhabit it. This is the real promise. Not a future without sadness, but a future where sadness is no longer a prison. It's a state where you move with purpose, knowing that each challenge overcome brings you closer to who you always knew you could be. So far, you've been exposed to ideas, metaphors, and tools that can profoundly change how you cope with persistent sadness. But any knowledge left unapplied risks becoming just another distant memory. The next step is to make a public commitment to this transformation. It's not just about joining a channel or following a piece of content, but about making a gesture that symbolizes the decision to walk this path of responsibility and meaning. An effective call to action goes beyond a superficial invitation. It needs to connect the concrete act to a greater purpose. When you subscribe to this channel, leave a comment or share this content, you're not just helping to spread the word. You're declaring that you value what you've learned and intend to keep it alive in your daily practice. It's a way of telling yourself, I'm in, I'm committed to moving forward. This public commitment has a powerful psychological function. The mind tends to act in a way that's consistent with the statements we make out loud or visibly. When you take observable action, such as actively interacting with this content, you increase the likelihood of sticking to what you're learning. It's like driving a stake into the ground and saying, "From here, I'm going to follow." Reciprocity is also essential. You've received insights and strategies so far that, if applied, can change the course of your life. Giving back is more than a gesture of gratitude. It's the beginning of a relationship of exchange. If this content brought you clarity, strength, or direction, give back now. Subscribe, like, and share. By doing so, you're not only supporting the work that made this conversation possible, but also reinforcing your commitment to this journey. This type of action isn't just symbolic for the content creator, it's symbolic for you. Each act of engagement is a reminder that you're not a passive spectator, but an active participant in the construction of a new state of life. And, like any construction, this requires constant presence. Another reason to act now is to break the cycle of procrastination. How many times have you heard something powerful, thought, "I need to apply this," and then, within a few days, let it slip away? Taking immediate action, no matter how small, creates a concrete starting point. It's a way to transform intention into action. Furthermore, interaction builds community. When you comment, share, or recommend, you connect with others facing similar struggles. This exchange is valuable because the path of accountability can be lonely if walked in silence. By speaking out, you find allies and strengthen your support network. The most important thing is to understand that this call to action is not the end, but the beginning. It's the first visible step in a series of steps you'll need to take. Simply pressing a button or writing a sentence won't, in itself, transform your life, but it represents the decision not to let this content be just another story you heard and forgot. It represents the choice to keep the flame that was lit alive. So act now. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because it won't come. You're already on the battlefield and have your first weapons in hand. Use them. Declare your commitment. Show your presence and willingness to continue. The road is long, but each step taken today makes the next one easier to take tomorrow. At this point, the journey we've been through has made it clear that persistent sadness isn't a mistake to be eliminated, but a territory to be traversed. From the outset, the goal wasn't to offer fleeting comfort, but to build a solid foundation that allows us to face chaos with lucidity and purpose. Now, it's time to consolidate this vision into a strategy that not only convinces intellectually, but also awakens the practical decision to embrace this strengthened identity. Persuasion here isn't based on flimsy emotional appeals or unrealistic promises. It's anchored in two fundamental truths. The problem is chaos. The solution is responsibility. There's no alternative route that maintains dignity and meaning. Escaping the burden only transfers the problem to the future, where it returns magnified. Embracing it voluntarily is the only path that transforms suffering into meaning. This message needs to be reaffirmed until it becomes part of the viewer's internal structure. It's not just about intellectually agreeing, but about internalizing the principle that the value of life is directly linked to the willingness to face its hardships. A comfortable but purposeless life is not a victory. It's a silent defeat. The strategy, therefore, is twofold. First, disarm the illusion that it's possible to exist without pain. Life doesn't allow that. This acceptance is liberating because it removes the unrealistic expectations that make pain even more unbearable. Second, redirect our focus to what we can control, our daily choices, the discipline to maintain order, the courage to face responsibilities. This focus rebuilds our sense of personal power. Persuasion is strengthened when the consequences of inaction are presented. Remaining inactive means allowing sadness to continue shaping your life without your consent. It's letting your own story be written by external forces. The question that arises then is inevitable. Do you accept living as a spectator or decide to be the author? This question isn't rhetorical. It's the core of transformation. Another essential element of this strategy is identity. It's not enough to change habits. You need to change the way you see yourself. Throughout this narrative, each concept and tool pointed to the construction of an active, responsible, and resilient identity. This identity is not a temporary role, but a lifelong commitment to the way you exist. Once embraced, it becomes the lens through which you interpret the world. And this is where persuasion reaches its peak, showing that this choice is exclusively the viewer's. No guide, mentor, or content can force this transformation. The role of the teacher is to light the flame. The role of the listener is to keep it alive. This clear division of responsibilities prevents dependency and strengthens autonomy. From this point on, the call is direct. What has been said so far will only be valuable if put into practice. Each principle must be tested on the battlefield of real life, adapted to personal circumstances, and repeated until it becomes instinct. This constant practice is what solidifies identity and prevents it from crumbling in the face of the next storm. Ultimately, the overall strategy boils down to a manifesto. Accept chaos as an inevitable reality. Embrace responsibility as your primary weapon. Build order daily. Maintain the vision of a desirable future. And never abandon the commitment to becoming stronger than you were yesterday. This isn't a promise of easy victory, but a guarantee that, regardless of the outcome, you will live a meaningful and dignified life. This is the choice before you now. The chaos will continue to exist, but how you rise to face it will define not only your days but the entire story you leave behind.